Welcome to yet another edition of the Old Paratrooper podcast. And today's guest, all the way from New York City, founder of Shooting Blanks, prolific celebrity interviewer, Mr. Bradley Blanks. How you doing, pal?
Yeah, Chris, how are you, mate? Yeah, rocking, feeling good. Yeah. It's funny, I don't even know what I call myself sometimes. I think it gets on my wife's nerves because she doesn't know how to introduce me, or and even when I talk about what has been what I'm trained in, essentially, if you're going to break down, we all have what we're trained in, what our actual skills are, and what our craft is. And I would be, my craft is morning radio show sidekick, co-host that is dropped in the middle of a group of people that can get them all talking and cracking comedy at the same time. Some people have called me a conduit of comedy. But yeah, so I've given you what my craft is, but yes, and a lot of that craft has gone into me over the last 25 years of getting in front of very famous people and trying to have a gentlemanly chat.
No, well, I've been watching your interviews. I've seen your interviews pop up all over YouTube and all over the place on social media for years. I find them hilarious. I think you have a brilliant rapport with like the people that you interview. And yeah, like I say, when you agreed to come on the podcast, I was proper. I didn't expect you to reply, to be honest. A lot don't. So when you replied, I was like, oh my God, yeah, brilliant. So here we are. And thank you very much for taking the time to come on. I really, really appreciate it.
Great to be with you, mate. And you've done great work in your podcast as well. And you're interviewing some great people that you're finding with great backgrounds and inspiring stories, which is also awesome to see. So I'm flattered that you've managed to push me into your incredible array of subjects that you've interviewed, whereas I see myself as a goofy Australian that somehow stands on street corners here in the middle of New York hoping someone will talk to me.
Well, look, the pleasure's all mine, but we could sit here all day blowing smoke up each other's arses, but I can assure you the pleasure is all mine, pal. I kind of, what I like to do with all the podcasts is kind of, well, firstly, one of the major goals of the podcast is I'm very vocal about is trying to raise awareness for mental health. It's a big topic, people kind of harp on sometimes and say, oh, are we pushing that again? I won't make any apologies for kind of pushing it. I've lost a lot of people, military over the years and the fire service through suicide. So I get people on. It's trying to reach a bigger audience. So I always try and get that bit in there. Some people have struggles with mental health. Some of the guests don't. That's just the way it goes. But it's about kind of raising that awareness and getting out, getting the point out there and, getting people talking at the end of the day. Like I say, what I like to do with all the podcasts is get a bit of a background, go back to the beginning, kind of where you grew up and the route that you followed through life to where you ended up now. So yeah, kind of, obviously you're in New York, but we've alluded to the fact that you're from Australia. So yeah, whereabouts did you grow up, pal?
Yeah, I grew up in a small country town called Cobram, about 200 miles north of Melbourne. It's on the Murray River, a town of 4,000, dairy farming community. And my mum was a school teacher. My father sold caravans there, and then he had the local caravan business. He loved that. He loved that game of selling vans. Yeah, played Aussie rules football down the local footy club and cricket and a lot of sports in that town, a big sports mad community. It was a great place to grow up. On my bike every day, out after school with all my mates and rolling. And then you get to about 15 and you have your first beer, and 16 you're sort of sneaking into the pub. You're having a few bets on the horses, and it was a good late teens time there to grow up in a country town, because you've got mates that got licenses and you're going out to other towns and chasing the girls over in another community and shooting your shot and failing. And it was just a great youthful country boy experience. And growing up there in country Victoria, Australia. And then you hit 18 years of age and you're off. You're off into the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been to Australia twice. I go back in hopefully January 2026.
Oh, good.
To sort of done the West Coast, did the usual kind of British kind of traveling routes, did the coast, East Coast in a camper van. But
Mate,
I love
you
Australia.
guys dominate it there. It's awesome. I was there over a week before Christmas. I was on Bondi Beach. You know, I took my 15-year-old son there, and we're on Bondi walking around, and it's noon. You know, noon. It's a beautiful day, hot day, and every part of the beach is covered. And then even the grassy knolls behind Bondi Beach are covered, and they're all British backpackers. Someone should have walked around for Union Jack going, this is a proud moment for Britain. Just the accents and the flesh. The Brits on tour when it's a hot sunny day is inspiring stuff, mate. You know, like my 15-year-old son's eyes were falling out of his head. He'd never seen so many G-strings in his life. You know, but yeah, men and women, just all young men and women, Brits just covered every square inch of Bondi Beach. So you guys do a great job when you go to Australia.
Well, you know, it's the first opportunity that we see a bit of sun. If we're not burnt, then it's not kind of making
Yeah,
it
that's
count,
right.
you know, because we get nothing here. You know,
Yeah,
we kind of, I don't even
yeah,
think we have a summer or a winter now. It's just
that's
grey
right.
and
That's great.
miserable pretty much 11, 12 months of the year. So, no, I love Australia. I'm a massive fan. I'd love to kind of, when I retire from my current profession, to kind of
Yeah,
settle over there. That's one of the plans.
yeah.
But Bondi Beach, I was there like couple of years back, and it was so windy when they were there that it was taking my eyeballs out because the
Wow.
sand's like silica, isn't it? It's like a
Yeah, yeah.
very fine sand,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Don't be there windy. Just get there,
yeah,
hot sunny day, and watch the people cavorting on the beach. It's inspirational.
absolutely. Like I say, love Australia. So it begs the question for me, being a British person over Australia. I think it's almost like, you know, it's an amazing place. Why would you leave?
Yeah, look, mate, I get that. I get that from Americans sometimes walking down the streets of New York City because you know I'm in the middle of this crazy town where people are on top of each other and there's sort of anger and met with excitement on the streets of New York. But look, it's funny. I grew up in a town. I love my town. We had a great time. But I grew up with a mother that had a big imagination. She sort of had this global view of the world and people. And I would just hear stories of people from her, you know, and the stories she would talk about are essentially famous people, global politicians. Growing up, I heard a lot about the Kennedy family and, you know, and how they fitted into American society. So I'm constantly getting these stories from my mum and then it's you know people that she would read about in magazines, movie stars, and how they all cross related into the American fabric. And I grew up loving television, and then of course the you know a child of the '80s, you know the videotapes. I was a mad you know just prolific watching of movies with you know my mates and I, and you'd watch 7 or 8 movies on a day. Sometimes if it was a hot day outside, you'd stay inside and you'd smash out. You know, I'm talking if it's like a 40 degrees Celsius day, you just smash out about 8 films in a row. I'm talking this is like 85, 86, 87. And so I always had this sense of wonder what was out in the world outside my country town. And I think it led to, falling in love with the US, falling in love with America, and sort of this, from that Hollywood, sense of anything can be achieved over in that country. Uh, and then that sort of, as you get a bit older and you get out of that sort of fantasy mind stage of being a kid, into the later stages of teenhood or whatever. And it more so, I was watching more like Woody Allen movies. I loved Seinfeld. I loved all of the early Robert De Niro, Mean Streets, Taxi Driver. And I started then developing this love of New York. I wanted to see what New York City's going to be like. It's my dream to go and live there one day. And you're formulating that the whole way through. And I went to university. I studied, finance, accounting, with all this eye on being an entertainer somehow, which is weird. I auditioned for a few plays. I auditioned for a movie during that period in the 90s. I had this want that I'd be an actor or something, but I don't want to be completely broke, so I want to earn some cash. And that's why I went down sort of the accounting road. And I was always fascinated with business anyway. And then after my last exam, I get on an aeroplane. I said, I'm going to New York. And I finished my university degree. stupidly now when you look, when you make these decisions as a kid, you're like, why did I actually do that? I got on a plane, I flew to New York, and I got over here and I lived in a backpackers hostel for 3 months, and tried to get a job, couldn't get a job anywhere, but I had the time of my life. And then this is like 1996, the end of 96. So the town was still very raw. It wasn't gentrified. There was action and grime and madness on the streets. But to go from Australia, Melbourne, where I was going to university in Melbourne, a beautiful city, into this sort of concrete jungle of craziness of people from all over the world, and big attitude and people screaming at each other. It was like I'd found my nirvana. So I think it was just that point of difference with Australia. And coming to New York as an Aussie, you come here and you're like, look, my backup plan, if everything fails, I can get on a plane and go home. I live with my mum for the first month, get back on my feet, try to scratch together a bit of cash, and then move down to Melbourne and try to, get a job. That was always my backup plan. Whereas, it was nice to have that safety net in your back pocket of knowing Australia would always be there.
Yeah, you've always got that opportunity to go back, but if you don't try, then you never get anywhere, do you? And I talk about it a lot, about putting yourself out your comfort zone. And for being a young kind of, a young sort of teenager, a young adult, and then kind of getting off your arse from a small town in Australia to go to the Big Apple, which I can only imagine, because Australia is mega, mega chilled from my perspective.
Yes.
It's really chilled. There's a lot of outdoor activities. There's a lot of barbecues on beaches and stuff like that. To go to like the chaos of New York.
Yeah, well, it's like, I got here in that first 3 months and I failed. I couldn't get a job. I couldn't get anything. I had this idea that I'd get a job on Wall Street as a junior, whatever. I didn't care. And then at night I'd go to acting classes or something and try to get something going in that way. And, I came here and got on the piss and attempted to chase around Swedish backpackers at a hostel and, tried my hardest and I'm like, this place is amazing. And I failed. And then I ran out of money and I moved to London, which was great. So I did 3 years in London, and that's where I got the job in a bank. And I saved my money and, did back office stuff there in banks. So, was living on the old Kent Road, lived in Seven Sisters, and Seven Sisters was great. I'd get on the way to work. I'd see the same ladies every morning, the women of the night who were coming home. Morning, darling. Morning, day. You develop a nice rapport when you walk past each other every morning. Yeah, they're finishing their night shift. These lovely ladies, poor darlings, and they're going home, and I'm getting on the train in a crappy suit I got for my 21st birthday, going into the city of London for a job. But I loved those 3 years in London, and then I end up back in Bondi in the year 2000. And when I say back in Bondi, back to Australia, but I said I'm going to go and live in Bondi, and it was kind of like living in a mini London. Bondi was full of Brits and the excitement, but I wanted to be back in Australia for that Olympic year. It was the Sydney Olympics, and I wanted to be a part of my country putting on a world show, and I was kind of proud Aussie that we're going to show the world what was going on. So I moved there, and I was trying my hand at writing, trying to write a sitcom, trying to write TV. I had some cash sort of saved, but again, failing miserably. And I'm like, what the hell have I done? I had a really good, easy life, in terms of making good money, living in London, good friends, things. It's one of those towns, as you know, in London, if you have a bit of cash, you can afford to take a taxi home as opposed to taking a 2 a.m. tube home, which is madness. So, and London's a real geography game. If you live in the town where your mates are, you can have a really good time. But if you're out in Seven Sisters on your own, it can be quite lonely at times. You know what I mean? So, things were starting to go well in London for me, and I'm like, what have I done? I've just come here. I'm blowing my life savings. I'm trying to be a writer. No one's hiring any jobs. I'm like rock bottom. I think I had some money in the stock market then. If you remember, the .com crash blew up in the early O's. Yeah. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing with myself? And and I said, but I got to hold tight here. The Olympics are on in 4 months, and I'd had a wedding planned to New York City in August of 2000, and that wedding was my best mate getting married in New York. So I'd prepaid that whole trip, so I couldn't screw that trip up. I was going there. I was going to go be a part of the wedding and get on the piss with my mates for a couple of weeks back in New York, the city that I'd lived in previously for 3 months. I thought I knew it all there. But I said, I've got to make it in entertainment somehow, because when the Olympics are over, I'm back to being an accountant somewhere, whoever will take me. So I get to New York, and I'm here on the piss every night. The wedding happens, great. And I have a few days up my sleeve, and I'd made a demo tape, which I'd never made before, for a mate of mine in Bondi. And my idea was to be someone's Sydney Olympics correspondent. How do I just be the phone call guy, because I knew TV's not going to take me. That's NBC. They have the rights to the Olympics. But someone in New York City, a radio station, will take a call from me during the Sydney Games. That was my idea, to be a Sydney Olympics correspondent. And I'm in my head, I'm like, I'll do sports, I'll do gossip, I'll do whatever this radio show, whatever one hires me, will take. So I get 20 radio stations. I'm sitting there on a hot summer's morning at a mate's place, August 2000, and I have a list from the old internet, and I just start calling the list. The first radio show or station I call is, and I don't know anything. I got no idea. I'm an accountant. I used to be an accountant at this stage in Lewisham. You know what I mean? That was my life. So here I am, an accountant in Lewisham, to sitting there calling radio stations, cold calling. So I call the first station. It's Howard Stern's radio station. He's the biggest star in world radio at the time. I call him, and the receptionist just hangs up on me. And I call another, next one on the list, bang, KTU, another New York station, hang up on me. Every receptionist hangs up on me. And this is kind of peak radio, when crazy people are calling radio stations all the time. Yeah. And, the stuff we grew up on loving, radio, and crazy listeners and whatever, everyone's hanging up on me. I get to pretty much the last call. I call this one last call, and I beg the woman. I said, just put me through to someone. Someone on your, I was calling it breakfast.
Anyone at all. The cleaner. I'm not bothered.
Mate, I would have pitched the cleaner. Exactly, mate. And I said, I have this idea for the Sydney Olympics. I'm Aussie. I'm in New York. I want to meet someone from your, I call it breakfast show, which in America, they don't call them breakfast shows. In Australia, we call them breakfast shows. I'm not sure what they call them in. Same.
Breakfast
I think.
Show. Breakfast show. Morning Britain.
But in New York, it's a morning show. So I'm like, shit, no, I screwed that up. But eventually, she puts me through to someone, and it's a voicemail. But the greeting on the voicemail was Steve Irwin, and I was like, oh my goodness, that is unbelievable. And so I went, here we go, and I just left the most colloquial Australian bushwhacking message ever. And g'day, mate. I'm Brad here. I'm from Bondi. I'm here to talk about koalas, kangaroos, all that bullshit. Anyway, I hung the phone up. And I said, well, that's it. I'm going back to Australia to figure out the rest of my life. I've had a good time here in New York, whatever. And I got a call straight back on the same phone I hung up on.
No way.
Landline, and the guy was pretty gruff, and he said, you have an idea? I said, yeah. He goes, come and pitch me tomorrow morning. I walk into that radio station the following morning. I'm dripping in sweat because I'd walked there, and I go into this guy's office, and it's the executive producer of the morning show, and he's very angry with me. He goes, what's your idea? I said, I want to be a Sydney Olympics correspondent. I want to call in every day from the Olympics. And he goes, all right, you have a demo tape? I said, yeah, here's my tape. He played the first 35 seconds, and he pulled the tape out and threw it in the trash can. He goes, it's not very good. And I went, oh, jeez. This is just like from one of those movies. The whole time I'm watching the movie, ticking over. All right. And he walked me down to a couch, and he said, sit on this couch. And I sat there for like 45 minutes, and no one talked. A couple of interns talked to me, which were nice. And then he said, come with me. And I go into the studio, and there's people bustling. There's probably 6 people bustling around in this small studio, which I now know is a radio studio. He said, sit there, put on the headphones. And I'd never been in a radio studio before in my life. I put the headphones on, and then I see the on-air light go on. I'm like, geez, I couldn't possibly be putting stranger on the radio. I've just walked in off the street, and I hear the famous NBC Olympic music in the background, this beautiful orchestra playing, and I'm like, oh, that sounds good. And then I hear a voice go, "We've been scanning the universe for our Sydney Olympics correspondent, and we're about to do a job interview right here." And in my head, first thought I have is, that's my fucking idea. He's just stolen my idea and put it straight on the radio. And which is the beauty of radio, people. And it was these two guys, Scott and Todd, on a station called WPLJ, and they start doing an on-air job interview of asking me why I'd be good at being their Sydney Olympics correspondent. And
no pressure at all.
No pressure, mate. And I'm just. It was probably the easiest I've ever been on air, because I was like loose, and I was a real smart ass that morning. I'm like, and they at the end of the 10 minutes of them interviewing me, they go, "Do you have any experience in broadcasting?" I went, "No." They said, "Any experience in TV at all?" "No." "Any experience in radio?" "No." And they looked at each other and said, "Perfect, you're hired. You're our Sydney Olympics correspondent." And I walk out of the studio. I said, "What the fuck just happened then?" And it's one of those moments where I kind of saw my life pass, moment where I was just sort of looking down on it going, something's just happened here. And walked out and got on the plane, went back to Australia, and they paid me $50 a phone call. And I called in every single day to this morning show, which turned out to be one of the biggest morning shows in America. Based in New York City, goes to New Jersey, Connecticut, Long Island. They had about 2.5 million listeners every morning. And it was a big women's male, so split evenly. Kind of like I always say to Brits, it's kind of like a Chris Tarrant show. Like that. Remember Chris Tarrant when he was, and the two hosts were like middle-aged men, very funny guys, straight man and a funny guy. And the Scott and Todd show, and they were great. And anyway, called in, and that's when I became this guy called Brad Blanks. And I wasn't talking sport. Everything was all, my fuck ups from the Olympics, trying to get interviews with famous people and failing. And, and we just had great running gags, and the Sydney Olympics were awesome. And I was on the piss every night, and I'd drink a 6-pack of beers pretty much before I'd get on the air with them, which was wild. And, I'd never do that now. And it was just an exhilarating feeling. And then it took me a year from that moment for them to hire me. So I was pitching them ideas for the next year. And eventually they brought me over in October 2001. And I was on that show for another 9 years.
Wow. So that's like a real crash and burn moment, though, isn't it? It's like, but from my perspective, they probably thought the balls on this guy. Yeah, to walk in here literally and say, right, this is what I want to do. I've got no experience in broadcasting, interview, nothing. And they're like, okay. But, you've got to admire that, because, again, it's one of them. If you don't try, you never know. And again, you can say whatever path. And it only takes one thing to kind of alter the path that you go on. And obviously that's what changed and kind of pathed out the rest of your career, isn't it?
Mate, you're exactly right. And as you say that back to me, I sit here and it's interesting when you talked earlier about mental health. Is there something in that whole mental health game? And if you're saying it's people that have got to certain stages in their career, do we pull back on that chance, though, going for those chances, those 1 in a million shots in our 40s, which creates that mentality of like, you sort of create this downness on yourself because you're not swinging the bat? Because I sit here and hear you say that back to me, and I'm like, I would never do that now, what I did back then. So, why are we giving up in our 40s as we approach our 50s or into our 50s, when we could still do these crazy things, crazy life moments? It's a real, is the human body creating its own defense, which in this modern world we shouldn't be defending. We should always be attacking life. I don't know. I'm just.
I don't know whether you get cautious with wisdom as you get older, or you kind of. I don't know, because I do kind of look back at the careers I've done over the years, and I think, well, I'd never dream of doing some of them now because one, they're too dangerous, and
Yeah,
I am a lot more cautious, and
that's
that
right.
probably filters into kind of everyday things. You think, well, I've got a job. It's difficult to quit a job that's paying a good
Right.
wage that
Yeah.
you do enjoy, or not enjoy, whichever it may be. To them, but it's secure, isn't it? And that, I think that's the key, when it's secure. And stepping away from that and taking a chance. And
Yeah.
I started this podcast back in February last year.
It's awesome.
A lot of people kind of knocking it. I was even questioning myself.
I
I
know.
never expected it to kind of. I mean, I'm not. It's not massive, but it's growing. And I've had
Yeah,
good
yeah,
guests.
yeah.
My first ever guest was Lucas Brown, former
Oh,
heavyweight champion of the world from
yeah.
Australia. So
Amazing.
I was like, you know what I mean. So it's just, I don't know. And I think the point being there, and if we could like pass on it, and if you've got a gut feeling about it, go and do it.
Yeah,
What?
yeah, yeah.
Why not? Why
And
not? You never
it
know what it might pay off.
yeah, it just again, when you said the cautious, yeah, it's good to be cautious. Keep your job, keep your pay packet, but if you're not doing anything outside that cautiousness could seep into you going, oh, I'm just not happy with my setup or my scenario in life. But you need that money because you got to pay your mortgage, you got to pay your bills, got to look after your family. But there are other endeavors now in this 21st century in 2025, like what you've done. You can create. I'm not call it. You can call them a hobby if you want, but you can lean into other areas now using technology. And in this case, you're doing a podcast, and you're now touching so many people, and you're organizing your thoughts. Your conversations with your real life mates on weekends are going to be different because you've gathered this process in your head of chatting to people, and then you're taking this stuff and you're going down the pub or going down to your local club or whatever you do and telling these yarns. I think there's something in that which is only adding more life to you. While you're also, let's say, you are using you as an example, or doing your 9 to 5 job, that's still that cautious there, still that security, still making making a wage. It's awesome what you've done, and you've created something over the last 18 months or the last year, which is creating people, touching people.
Yeah, but I'm a big believer in experiences and having a
Mm.
story to tell. I like having a
That's right.
story to tell.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
bore the absolute tears out of people at work talking about the guests I've had on the podcast. They're like,
That's
we're talking
awesome.
about the podcast again.
Yeah,
Come and tell
yeah,
us about the podcast at
yeah,
10:30 tonight, sort of thing.
yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
It's great.
But
It's awesome.
you've got to challenge yourself. You've got
Yeah,
to, your brain's meant to be
that's
trained.
right.
It's meant to absorb
Yeah, yeah.
knowledge. And if you're not doing that, you're stagnating. And I think that's sometimes where the mental illness, I'm no expert,
No,
but
no.
I think where the mental health issues and mental illness can sometimes creep in. Obviously, you've got some people have a genetic disposition.
Right.
It kind of may be something that runs. But I think sometimes if you're not keeping your brain active or not
Yeah, yeah.
pushing yourself, I'm a strong believer in putting yourself out of your comfort zone, taking the chances, because again, you never know where it might alter your life, change your
That's right.
life.
Oh,
You never know where it might lead you, and that's
that's
only can be a good thing, can't it?
exactly, mate. No, I love it, and I love that. The challenging the mind, and and keeping and that. As I said it before, I said that organizing of your thoughts. So now you have this. Your thoughts are organized from doing a podcast, interviewing weird and wonderful people, and inspiring stories, and people that have changed themselves that they don't realize that is helping other people see that change in them can change your listeners. And then you take those stories and you go down the pub or you go anywhere or in the workplace and you're chatting about it. It's awesome. It's great. And that gets back to the modern man, mateship. What's mateship like now? We work so hard at looking after our family and being a big part of the family that sometimes you can drop the ball on your mates and it's harder to catch up. But I think that's another thing you got to keep on doing. You got to keep checking in with your friends, even if they're in different countries or where they are in the world. Keep that going, and then if you can catch up and see a few every few weeks, I think that's super important as well.
Yeah, it's about having that community. It's just support. At the end of the day, your friends and your family, they're support networks, aren't they?
Yes,
You're
for
a
sure.
support network for them. They're a support network for you, And I always say this as well about the podcast. It's selfish reasons. I get to talk to interesting people like yourself, on a kind of 2 or 3 times a week. I kind of have different podcasts with different, and I'm absorbing information from people like yourself, as well. And I find it fascinating. And
Yep.
there's not a great deal of financial gain for me at the minute
No.
from it, but I find it
Doesn't matter.
really kind of as a hobby. I'm hoping it will transpire into a business later down
Yeah.
the line. But
Yep.
look, I get to talk to people like your good self, and I'm more than happy about that. So no, fair play to you. So that's where the story started. Then that's how come you got your break, as it were,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Where did you go? Because a lot of these, obviously, we looked at your kind of career path, and a lot of these overlapped. So you're doing a lot of sort of radio stations at the same time, and they were overlapping and stuff. Is
Yeah.
that something? So were you kind of freelancing?
Yeah, look, it's a funny one. I'm a part of this show. I get there October 01. September 11 happened the month before, so the world's changed, and I'm like, I'd been living in London when I was working as an accountant on the day of September 11 in London. Watch all that unfold, in real time, because it's afternoon London time. Watching it after the first plane hit, and it's like absolutely madness. And and by that stage, I was working with the radio station if I was going to get the job or not. And I didn't hear after 9/11 for obvious reasons. I didn't hear from them for a month. The line was cold. Didn't hear from them. And they ring, and I get a hold of them like mid-October. And the same executive producer that I walked in the door of a year before goes, "Oh no, we still want you. Can you be here next week?" I went, "Oh shit! All right, yeah, great." So I retired from the accounting job. I think I was working for British Telecom, pardon me, at the time. And I said, "Guys, I'm off to take a low-paying job in New York City as a radio sidekick." And I get over and I land in New York, and the city was actually full of life and love, and the pubs and the bars were, everyone was happy. It was people had gone completely opposite to what you'd think after a major, breakdown in civilization with 9/11 happening, and people were up and about, and people would look you in the eye. Very not New York. People would look you in the eyes. People would smile at you on the street. It was a beautiful moment happening. And I came in. I on day one. I remember my first day on full time radio. I turn up, and their guest is Sting. Sting's there. I'm like, holy shit, Sting! What the fuck? Like, I grew up loving the Police, and I'm like the band, and I'm like, oh my God, Sting's in the studio. I'm just sort of just keeping out of his way, but I'm on air. The Sting is on air, and I thought, geez, this is going to be great fun. So I stay a part of that show, and my deal was kind of structured that I could, they didn't own me completely, which was awesome. So I would just go out, the first other show I joined was part of I was working for the whole ABC Disney family. And like this, there was another show in Minneapolis that I was on for, went on to do it 20 years on this breakfast radio show, morning radio show in Minneapolis. But how I got the job is the executive producers would do like a monthly call and share comedy bits and ideas and stuff. And the executive producer, Bruce, the guy that founded me, goes, we got this guy on our show, an Australian guy. He goes out and does funny interviews with people on the street, and he goes to these big events. He'll do this. We sent him to the Super Bowl, and he interviewed a hooker. And it was funny, and he hung up he said the line went dead to like 15 other executive producers across America, and one person piped in and said, I'd like to talk to you about the Aussie guy that interviews hookers. And Bruce goes, all right, we'll take that offline. And anyway, called him up, and it was the executive producer of this Minneapolis morning show called KQRS. It turned out to be this huge show in the Midwest of America, and with a host called Tom Bernard. And the producer rings me up and goes, what's your first gig? Where are you going? What's your next gig? Where's your next event? And this is June 2002, and you're like this. And I said, well, I'm actually going next week to the Tyson Lennox Lewis fight. I said, it's my dream to see a heavyweight boxing fight. And, I grew up loving boxing, with sitting there with my dad watching Ali, and then of course the excitement of Tyson in the mid 80s. And, I wanted to see Tyson in the flesh. And this producer goes, all right, done. Can I book you for the Friday morning before the Tyson fight live from Memphis? So I said, done. Yeah, fine, great. So I go out to the boxing there, and I have this great week. I've got a press ticket, so press credentials, and everyone's there. The BBC's there. I'm meeting amazing people, huge British contingent of journalists, and every night's a party. And of course, I went out, looking for a hooker. I couldn't find any hookers in Memphis, which is pretty poor. But I found a girl selling hot dogs at the local baseball game on the Thursday night. I gave her $10. I said, "Can you make out you're a prostitute? Because this radio show in Minneapolis really wants me to interview a hooker for their show." And this girl beautiful Southern accent. "Yeah, sure, no worries." And she put down her hot dogs. And I did this 5-minute interview with this young woman about business when everyone's coming in to watch the Tyson-Lennox Lewis fight. And she was just fantastic. And so I took that interview, and Friday morning, get on with Tom Bernard, this legend, this big, tough, gravelly voice guy, a legend of radio, can be a curmudgeon at times. And I get on, and before I go on, the producer goes, "Look, Brad, he might wrap you up after a few minutes if he doesn't like you." And I said, "Oh, whatever, I don't give a shit. I got thick skin." But I sent them that interview, and I get on there, and I talk to this guy, Tom Bernard, for 20 minutes about the fight, about the madness, what I'm doing there. And I play the interview with this hooker that's obviously not really a hooker. She's a lovely, sweet girl selling hot dogs at the baseball. And they just thought it was hilarious. And I said, "Thanks, guys. See ya." From that moment on, I went on and did a weekly report on that radio show for 20 years. 20 years, wow. every Thursday, Friday, with my stupid interviews would play in Minneapolis. So, so I started doing these these other radio shows, which, helped me realize that it just wasn't Scott and Todd. It made me better. And, radio, everyone's different, as you know, listening to radio, and every show's different, and everyone wants something different. So I was able to change myself, but keep that essence of this hopeless, hapless radio reporter.
Yeah, well, it's like you've created a niche there, haven't you? You've kind of that people really kind of sort of warm to, and I think there's a lot to be said about being authentic, And what you've probably find, I mean, you tell me you're more in that world than I'll ever be, but like, you see some reporters, and I've always said it before, it's about, you've got to have a character about you. And I do see a lot of podcasts out there, where the host, they have all these special effects and everything else, and then the host is like, "Oh, so tell me about this." And it's a bit the same with kind of interviewing, isn't it? You've got, if you're this larger than life character, you're willing to have a laugh, people naturally warm to that, wouldn't they? So it's about creating that.
Yeah, for sure. My whole basis was I don't want to edge here. I'm not trying to roll you, because most of the people, I was the only radio guy. How it started, October 2001, is I've been doing man on the street stuff, and I love that. I loved interviewing every man about an issue of the day, and I'd create comedy, with that person. I'd set a normal person on the street, and I'd make him or her funny. Like, one example was I'd go out and do New Year's resolutions every year, and I found a woman on the street, and I'd do them early in the morning, before the show, like 5:30 a.m. So you're getting all sorts of characters in New York. And this one woman goes, I said, "What are your New Year's resolutions?" And she with thick Russian accent. This is outside Madison Square Garden, in New York City. And she goes, "Oh, I'm going to give up smoking." And I said, "Well," as she's smoking a cigarette, I said, "You're smoking a cigarette right now." And she goes, "God bless America." Like that. And I said, in a thick Russian accent, and then I'd go and play that interview. It was just dynamite comedy. So this woman just became brilliant. It had a great joke. But then I sort of took that, and it was about October, November, no, not October. I got there in October 2001, and by about December 1st, 2001, I was doing my first, big sort of round table where I'd ask a question with other journalists was Will Smith for the Ali movie, the Rumble in the Jungle, and and Will Smith, I asked Will a question, he loved it and put on a show, and I'm like, holy shit, this is Will Smith. and that's when I realized I could take that man on the street stuff and do it with celebrities. So I started going to these red carpets, and I'd be the last one on there. I said I'm at the arse end of the red carpet, down there, holding my little microphone. I didn't have a camera. I just had a little recorder, hit record, like and I'd do these interviews. And I knew I had to be respectful, but I still had to be funny. So I still had to have this edge. Like, I loved watching Dennis Pennis do his red carpet interviews.
I remember in the 90s,
he was unbelievable, but I couldn't be Dennis Pennis, and there was for Howard Stern, he had a guy called Stuttering John who was hilarious, and he'd go out on red carpets, but he'd eventually get banned, and the bit would just die because you couldn't keep doing it all the time. And I said, well, my goal here is different to theirs. A, I still want to make comedy and get a laugh out of these celebs, but B, I want to be invited to the after party and drink free piss. I'm broke. You know what I mean? Like, I want to go and eat. I want to eat shrimp. Prawns from where I'm from. I want to eat shrimp. I want to see a tower of shrimp and drink their free beer. So that was my goal. So to do that, you had to kind of be a little bit respectful and get invited to the after party. So if that was my philosophy, that's how I went out and did it, while also taking those audio bits that I'd create and put them on the radio. But it was all about the story of how I got the interview, how the interview played out. The interview didn't have to be great. It just had to sort of have a beginning, middle, and an end, punchline at the end. And then the hosts of any show that I was on would kind of hang shit on me, that I should have asked that, or I screwed up asking that, or I got nervous with that question. And it would create a whole 10-minute radio segment. And it'd be all about me going to the party afterwards as well. So I created this great little, let's call it a format of what I was doing. And it was so different to the other reporters because they were asking about the chemistry of the movie and, what was it like to work with him? Or they were gossip columnists. And I wasn't into any gossip. I couldn't give a shit who's shagging who or who's breaking up with who in Hollywood. If anything, I was making the segment about my moment with a celebrity, and it worked.
No, brilliant. Well, again, it's one of them. Like you say, you created like you say the format, and you seem to have this real kind of rapport. And obviously, over the years, you've got your name out there now, and obviously the stars recognise you. The two that keep popping up on my feed quite regular are the one with Jennifer Aniston and Adam Sandler when you're knelt down. And Adam Sandler's reaction is like, "Oh my God!" And, you stand up, absolutely brilliant. And obviously, you've struck up quite a rapport with kind of Ricky Gervais as well. Obviously, he's a bit of a kind of idol back here in the UK, naturally, as you'd expect. A bit controversial at times, but he's an hilarious comedian, and and a very intelligent man. So yeah, how do you genuinely have a good relationship with Ricky in that as well?
Yeah. So Gervais has been awesome. When I was trying to get that job on radio in New York, I was working for British Telecom, and I was living in Wandsworth this time. I'm giving you a bit of a tour of London, of all my haunts, of where I'd start out sleeping on a mate's couch, and someone would move out, and you'd eventually take over the rent. I was living in Wandsworth, and that's August 2001. And it's when The Office debuted. So I'm watching this show, which I think everyone was in the same boat when they first saw it, and they're watching it, and I'm like, what the fuck is this show? Like, this is the weirdest.
Is it real?
You might chuckle, but you're like, I shouldn't be laughing at this if this is a documentary. And I'm like, geez, this is fucking weird, but I'm going to watch it next week because this has kind of blown my mind what the hell I've just watched. And British comedy is always the best. And there've been other shows like that leading up to that moment. And I couldn't pinpoint Gervais, but I used to watch that. It was at the 11 o'clock show that was on Channel 4 and in 98, 99. It was that guy in a suit that'd be hosting it. And that's where LEG had his segments on there as well,
definitely,
if you remember. Yeah. And anyway, Gervais would have a segment on there where he'd berate the crowd, but I still watching this show. I couldn't place Gervais. Anyway, so I started watching it. Then I moved to America, and then I kind of forgot about it. But then it came back into my consciousness probably a year later. I think my sister sent me over the first season on tape, and I watched it. But by this stage, it's 2005. I'm in New York. Gervais had no, he'd already won his Golden Globes. The big moment in America for him was when the whole show won the Golden Globes, and Merchant and him got up on stage, and their executive producer was in the wheelchair, and they're all lined up on stage, and Gervais says, "What a weird looking bunch of people we are." It's just a great, they all look so un-Hollywood, and Gervais just loved that moment. Anyway, he'd made some cartoon movie, that didn't get much pick up. I think he was a voice, and I think Ewan McGregor was a voice in it. And I got offered to interview him, and it was four journalists that interviewed him. We each got like 20 minutes each, and it was 10 minutes each, I think, and went to a hotel here in New York, and I went in and I filmed it. That interview's on YouTube, but I had no idea about filming or whatever, and all it is just two dark heads talking to each other. And that was in 2005, and it was good. And then I saw him a year later on another red carpet, or later that year, and did a funny interview. And he started to remember. And then every year I would start interviewing him, and he started remembering me. And my whole thing with him was his mind is so brilliant, and he's so sharp. And I'm in the business of setting the person up, right? So I'm like, if I stuttered a little bit or said an extra word in my sentence, it'd actually increase his comedy, because you could see his brain giving him an extra second to create another joke. And when when you deal with people and you talk with people, and he was so quick at creating gags off the cuff that it was just a joy to chat with. And so I ended up, I think I've gone out and interviewed him about 25 times now. And he'll say to me, one stage he goes to me, Blakesy, you're the second most interviewer of me in America. And I'm like very happy with myself. Oh, thanks, Ricky. Thanks for remembering. That's very nice. I said, oh, who's number one? He goes, oh, Dave Letterman is number one. And I went, oh, right. Oh, cool. I said, well, what's the difference between me and Dave Letterman? And he goes, well, Dave Letterman's a professional. And I'm like, oh, that's I said, well, what am I, Ricky? And he goes, those guys that stand near on a box in Hyde Park corner, carrying plastic bags full of newspapers, screaming, "I love Jesus." That's you. Yeah. And I went, oh, thanks. Thanks, Ricky. It was just a beautiful quote of summing me up beautifully. But yeah, a ripper guy, and very generous, and it's been a joy to watch sort of his evolution in comedy, and how he's changed, and now he's like this, a man of logic. You listen to him for logic on the world more than even sometimes his jokes. But he's a ripper.
It's weird though, because he does get a lot of stick, but I feel that people don't understand. He uses the comedy to really raise points that really matter, and it's very intelligently done. And a lot of people, he gets a lot of criticism on social media. I mean, social media is, no matter what you do, you could be a complete saint, you will get some sort of backlash on social media, because people just like to do that. But I think what he does is very intelligent.
Nails it. Yeah, the great thing, Chris, the great thing is he has a great joke or a great line in his special from last year, where he says, he goes, the great, everyone knocks me, but you got to understand, I was woke, and you guys moved, not me. You know what I mean? Like, he goes, you moved, the movement moved. I thought I was woke 10 years ago. But so don't blame me. You know what I mean? Like, you guys are the ones, that have changed the goalposts. It was a real interesting, and you're like, wow, but it's funny how, left and right both take him as their savior. And you go, and you just sit there and go, well, he's logical on how everything is. Anyway, it's a crazy world out there. But on the Adam Sandler and Jennifer Aniston, I'd interviewed Sandler quite a few times leading up to it, but he's such a superstar. So you never know if he knows you, as opposed to someone like Gervais, who knows my madness and standing on red carpets and whatever. And But Sandler, you don't know if he knows me or remembers me or not. But that video was taken in 2011 of me scaring Aniston and Sandler, and it was just a media scrum. And I'm like, I'm not going to get anything in a normal, my style of interviews here with these two superstars that are walking the red carpet together. It's always harder when two celebs are walking together. So I get down. I said, I might get a laugh here if I get down on my knees. And I'd been interviewing a few people in media scrums leading up to that on my hands and knees. I remember I interviewed Oliver Stone at the Wall Street sequel, Wall Street, the movie sequel. And I did it on my knees. And I was down on the ground. I was kind of right next to his knees going, what the fuck am I doing down here on this guy's knees? This is bizarre. And he's looking down to me as I'm interviewing him. And it was fucking very funny in a weird way. Anyway, I said, look, my best bet is to get down on my knees and just at least state the camera can get it. Yeah, because I got about 10 cameras behind me. And I said, well, something could happen. If Aniston bites on this and says for me to stand up, I've got something here. This is going to be good. Any reaction out of her is going to be awesome. And I'll tell you, mate, she took it hook, line, and sinker. And she said, what are you doing down there? Stand up. And that moment, I just went, I can create something here that could be fucking awesome. So I slowly, I said, I always loved those old Dracula movies from the 60s, in black and white, where Dracula would just rise above someone before he attacked them or suck their blood. And so I said, I'm going to be like Dracula. I'm 6'5". So what's that, about 198 centimeters? And so I'm down on my thighs are burning. I got my microphone, my cameraman, who's this, not even a real life cameraman, standing behind me, holding my little camcorder. And I just start rising. I start rising. And I said, I'm going to get on tippy toes. No one can see my feet. So who gives a fuck? You know what I mean? So I stand on tippy toes, but I'm wide. So I just, and I get wider. So I put everything into it, and I just get bigger and bigger. But I could see Aniston's eyes dilated. Yeah. And Sandler's like, holy fuck, this guy is an animal. And I just get up and I'm standing above Adam Sandler. And that's when, they react in the best fashion. And in my head, I'm going, this is gold. And that was back in, mate, 2011. And I put it up on YouTube. It did all right on YouTube back then. And about 18 months ago, someone ripped it from YouTube and put it on their TikTok. And then someone ripped it from TikTok and put it on Reddit, and it just took off. So every 2 to 3 weeks now, that video pops up in my life. So you just don't know where the magic comes from, and it's been fun to be a part of something that I did 14 years ago. Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of never know, do you? I mean, I didn't know that you'd actually kind of planned it. I kind of, now that you mentioned it, I could see, it looked, you know what? It looked very unplanned. So hats off to you.
I'm sorry to sound like I planned it, but I'm just pouring a bit of, I was just trying to get a reaction. That was my game.
Throwing a bit of corn down, throwing a bit of corn down. But
exactly. I love that.
Their expression says it all. And it's like you say, as you rise up in front of them, their faces are like, whoa. And then you see their expressions change. No, it's a quality clip. And that came up. I think that came up on my feed this morning. I'm not even kidding you, because I was giggling to myself thinking, God, I've got this guy on in about 3 hours time.
It's great. And look, I hope I run into Sandler and Aniston again, and I'd love to know if they actually see that. Surely their friends are sending it to her, because because Aniston's actually really, I mean, she's kind of hanging shit on me, but she's in shock of this monstrosity in front of her. But it was a raw, cool moment. I think that's the thing. You're seeing these perfectly manicured, orchestrated celebrities in this sort of authentic space, and that's where the laughs come from. Especially when Sandler calls me, goes, "That's awful," and I'm fine with that. I love that.
Well, you know what you just said there, that is, and it's almost refreshing sometimes. When you see interviews from old with like famous footballers from the UK, like Paul Gascoigne. Everyone knows Paul Gascoigne from around the world. he was a character when he was being interviewed, and now it seems a little bit like. Now I'm not trying to offend anyone, but they're very media trained, aren't they? So they're very media trained. And I think everyone's a little bit scared of kind of saying something wrong, or putting the foot in it, or interpreting. So there's an air of caution. So I think it's kind of refreshing with what you do, and you go out there and you have these really authentic kind of, and that the celebrity ends up ripping. They know what they can get away with. They end up ripping it, giving you a bit of shit. You give them a bit of shit back, and I really like that. And I feel like the world's missing that. So hats off, pal, for doing it.
Thanks, mate. Yeah. It's great fun.
I think it's brilliant. Sort of touching on that, then, is there any kind of celebrity? Now, you don't have to say, obviously it's a bit of a difficult one, but is there any celebrities you've interviewed and gone, oh my God, this is difficult, and it's not gone the way that you expect?
Yeah, look, everyone I go back to on that one is and I love the guy. It's Billy Crystal. I got it, and it was a freezing cold night in New York, and that's probably why. I think it was one of those sequel to Analyze That. It was early on. I'm talking like 2003. That was the film where he was a psychologist and De Niro was a crime boss, and there was a comedy. And I got Billy Crystal, and I'm interviewing him, and he was just he didn't want to be there in the interview at all. And it's on a red carpet, so I get it. They don't have to talk to me, these celebs, on a red carpet. There's no contract. There's no even social. Celebs come on there and just keep walking. There's no sort of moral obligation. But he stayed there and talked to me, and he was a pain in the ass. And I'm like, shit, just walk away, mate, if you don't want to be here. And he's the first one that came that got me. But over the years, like I think back in, I asked Emily Ratajkowski, beautiful, model. She was in this Ben Affleck movie that was this psychological thriller, and she was the girlfriend interest. She had a small role in there, and I think I asked her something about in her bikinis or something, and she rolled her eyes at me and walked away, and I'm like, shit. So some people still don't, I'm trying to set her up to hang shit on me back, and sometimes they misinterpret it. So I've had a few moments like that, but it's funny. People ask me that with celebs, but in some ways my whole bit is I kind of want interviews to go badly. And I think if they're saying something wrong or not getting it at the beginning of an interview, they'll get it when they see. I can inject fear into my eyes pretty quickly, or that whole feeling of sweat coming down your brow when you're fucked up, in any circumstance of talking to someone. And I can inject that into that, and I'm hoping then I still get a reaction. So anything I get is still good. I've taken interviews and put them on air, and and remember, I'm going on other people's shows, or I'm a part of a show, and I'll play that interview, and they'll rate that celebrity, if they're good or bad. So sometimes if they're bad, it still comes out funny. But the biggest one that doesn't talk in this whole Hollywood game is Robert De Niro. Like, for one of the greatest actors of our lifetime, he is terrible at talking, and he's terrible at interviews. I remember on that night of Analyze That, he was just walking down the red carpet, wouldn't stop and talk to anyone. And I asked him a goofy question, something stupid. I don't even know what I asked him. And his answer was, huh? Like, huh? And kept walking. So we took that, huh? And introduced that as a Brad Blanks interview of Robert De Niro, and we played it. And that, huh, then became famous as a soundbite on our show for many years. Anyway, once a year then, or twice a year, I'd go to a red carpet with Robert De Niro there, and I'd get a little bit more. I'd get like, thank you very much. Oh yeah, the film was great. And I'd keep adding these, sound bites over and over to this compilation. And in the end, I'd interviewed De Niro like 30 times. But if you totaled all the sound together, when I say interviewed, nothing groundbreaking, just sound bites, I'd have like 2.5 minutes of Robert De Niro not wanting to talk. And it turned into this, I'm sitting there, so grumpy. And I'd be like, this has got to be, because Robert De Niro realized I've just created a running gag for my whole career of interviewing this guy about absolutely nothing. And it's one of my proudest achievements. I I have an interview series with the grumpiest, shortest talking Hollywood actor. Look, he's softened in his later years, and I've got him now for a minute and a half. But I'll fuck around with him. I'll tell him he's looking handsome tonight. One night I said to him, "Geez, I really love your turtleneck," and he knew I'd got him because he looked terrible in this turtleneck. And so I've enjoyed doing things like that. But to get back to your question, I could turn bad interviews still into fun moments on morning radio the next day, and that was always my goal.
Right. No, fair play. It was like I say, you've clearly got a knack for it, because it can't be easy, because you've got to think on your feet, haven't you? You've got that whole instant. It's not like me kind of interviewing you now for this. I've done my research, and I know you'll do an element of research, but you're going literally, and you're trying to catch. Usually, when people agree to come on the podcast, you expect them to be in a good mood because they've agreed to go on it. But if you're interviewing someone off the cuff, you don't know how you're catching them, and you might be like, "Oh shit,"
Mate, Chris, I got to say thank you, because you just summed up my whole my whole thing. It just makes me laugh. Like I hadn't. I'm not doing as many red carpets in the last few months, and I did a red carpet last week, and it was a big one. And I was on my cameraman. I'm saying, why do I put myself through this? Because it's a game of no's. You're getting rejected. I'm a middle-aged man, right? Happy with my lot in life. Everyone's good, but I go out here on the red carpet, and I have 23-year-olds tell me, no, you can't talk to this person, and I'm like, all right, well, no, by publicists, right? They're the gatekeepers in my game, and I just said, what am I doing this to myself? But then there's a moment where you get them and you create this chat, and it's this combustible energy that I'm trying to inject into it. I'm trying to create a high. I'm trying to create an explosion in a minute and a half. And when I say explosion, I'm trying to just create good, friendly banter. And so there is that sort of improvisation, or this could go anywhere. And it's those 100 no's you get. It's that one that pays off. That's a real thrill of capturing something that's. And it's like I'm sifting for gold in a world where no one else is. It's crazy to have become like this interviewer when my interviews only last a minute and a half, and most of them are screw ups.
Well, look, like I said to you, it works, and like I say, I find it refreshing, and I enjoy your interviews immensely. I'm not just saying that. I invited you on for that reason, because I enjoy what you do. So I suppose that leads me on. Like you've said, you've gone like out on your own now, and obviously you founded Shooting Blanks. And is that what you're kind of do now? You just go out and interview. So what is it you kind of do? You do any morning radio shows, or do
no?
You sometimes...
So I finished. I was on CBS FM for 9 years with Scott from Scott and Todd on PLJ. Left, went over to CBS FM. We had a great show over there, and that added another. It was a bit more mature side, not mature, but still stupid and goofy and trying to have a laugh. But it was the next evolution of what I was doing, and still went out to the big events like the Kentucky Derby and the Olympics, and I'd still cover all those things, the things I'd love to do anyway for that show. But then over the last 2 years, I'm on my own, just creating projects, and I'll go out and do my interviews and put them on other radio stations or anyone that would want them. And then just pushing social media. But I've been doing, I've transformed myself, which is hilarious. You'll laugh at this, and in transitions later in life, back in the O's, I'm talking 05, 06, 07, 08, I was just on fire, and every day I'd wake up energized and just go out and get interviews, create comedy bits. I was doing stunts on the radio, like dressing up as Elmo and running through New Jersey, like running a marathon through New Jersey, or riding a clown bike somewhere, or see how many bottles of mustard would cover my body. Typical breakfast radio, shtick, I guess you'd call it. But it was a great time, and I'm like, geez, I've got to get on TV. America was, the next thing from radio was got to get it on TV, and I was going out to LA trying to get meetings, and I was hustling hard, and nothing ever worked. But over the last 4 years, I've ended up on TV in Australia, and I do this sports report, weekly sports report on American sport, but done in my style. The essence is more the essence of John Daly, the golfer. He's like the patron saint of my segment. We idolize him. That guy could smoke a cigarette and hit a driver straight down the middle of the course while holding a can of beer. Like he's an astounding human being. I think that's an athletic performance I want to talk about. Or the guy in the baseball who's got his baby in one hand, also holding a beer, and somehow hands his beer to his wife as a fly ball comes and catches a baseball barehanded. Stuff like that. And that's sort of what I'm reporting on in my sports report back to Australia. I've ended up doing television, which is you get to a stage in your life where you're not seeking something and then it appears. Whereas 6, 17, 18 years ago, I would have given my left nut to be on TV. And so, look, I'm doing plenty of stuff to keep me busy, but I'm always, what's the next thing? And I think that's also important at our age. Like, what gets us out of bed in the morning, and what's the next? How can I keep creating something? And as much as we become givers, give to our family, and we've got to raise kids, and you got to be good to your wife, keep everything going, and keep everything on the straight path, or the path you choose. How do you get back to doing stuff for yourself, and what gives you that feeling of bouncing out of bed the morning? Because I remember back in that 10 years from 2001 to 2011, I was bouncing out of bed every day. I always use the horse racing analogy. Every post was a winner. You couldn't stop me, and it was bang bang. It was awesome, and it was this euphoric sense of creating work. There'd be ups and downs, huge emotional roller coasters, but I just felt, to me, I was getting ahead. I wasn't creating great wealth, or it wasn't money I was seeking. I was seeking performance, and wanting to create something funny on the radio every single day. And I think that's important as we, late 40s, into your 50s. And I'm asking the question. I'm putting that question out into the world. What is that thing that drives us? Continue getting fitter, in our 50s. Do we want to extend our life another couple of years so we see our grandchildren, or we can bend over with grandchildren in the future? I don't know. And that's, as I said, I'm putting that question is what's that thing that's going to make you bounce out of bed every morning?
Well, we can link that back again, right back at the mental health thing, can't we? I mean, it's about having purpose,
right.
And it's how as an individual you find that purpose. It might be new challenges, and like I say, I think it can be, your mindset changes. We said this before, in your 40s. I'm mid 40s now, and your kind of mindset changes. I know I look a lot older, but that's a lot of time spent in Baghdad. Before you say it, Brad, before you say it. It kind of, you get comfortable. You kind of, and exactly what you said there, when you stop trying so hard for something, sometimes because things are in the right place, you're a lot more chilled. They just fall into place, don't they?
Yeah. I mean,
there is exactly that.
It's unbelievable how things can come up and bite you. And I think that's a sense of looseness. And you talked about wisdom before. So look, I'm a big, wisdom as you get older. So, and we talked about cautiousness in your 40s and 50s as you're getting older with that wisdom. But then how do you amalgamate that with new endeavors, which, could help you get the brain right, get positive, and find new endeavors that not necessarily people are going to be on your team for. Your inner circle might not want you to go out on these new endeavors. And that's another issue you've got to overcome within your world. How do you go out and do something new that might not meet up with what your wife's objectives are with the family unit, or your friends might think you're crazy for starting a podcast, but we've got to keep trying these new things and seeing, these interests that tickle us to keep us sharp, to keep us going. It's a long life, right? If we stay healthy,
hopefully,
hopefully that's what I mean. You want to keep on, you want to keep pushing, and you don't want to be, 70 years of age isn't old anymore. if you put that into the equation, we've got to come up with new things and new ideas and constantly be thinking of that.
No, I know absolutely, pal. And you touched on there about having your kind of partner behind you, I think that is a great thing. My fiance, she's a firefighter as well. She's
Awesome.
been very, very supportive of kind of me doing the podcast when a lot of people were like, "What are you doing that for? It's stupid." But she's been very, very supportive, and she's given me free reign to kind of do it and help me. And she comes up with great ideas how I sort the thumbnails out and how I kind of get it out there a bit.
Brilliant.
More. Like I said, it's a learning process. But I think that's very important if you've got a supportive partner and friends as well. And obviously you taking the leap to step away, because obviously you'd have been paid for working on morning radio quite handsomely, I suspect, to then go, right, I'm going to go on my own. I mean, what was your partner's kind of verdict of that? Was she like, no, don't do it, or we've got a mortgage to pay, or you know what I mean?
Well, this one, this one was a good one in heading into 50, because we're more set up, we got things going good system, can swing the bat a bit more. I tell you when it was harder is when I walked away from PLJ in 2010. And that show went for another 3 years after I'd left. And, it was a huge morning radio show in New York. But I I had to get out and try. I had to go out. When I say I make documentaries, mine aren't real serious documentaries. Mine were all going to live with a family that grew giant pumpkins and highlight me, living with that family, stuff like that. But very Louis Theroux, but obviously I'm not Louis Theroux. I'm like the anti-intellectual, Theroux. But I had stepping away from that was the hard one. And that, I don't even know how I did it. We had a baby at 1 year of age. I look back on that and I'm like, Jesus, what am I doing? And
a new career with a new baby as well,
That's right. Yeah, it was madness, and that was a big show I was on. Things could have kept rolling and gone well for me, and and I was a part of a good team, and there was comedy every morning and comradeship and camaraderie and all that stuff. And I said, nah, I'm going to pull out of that. And then when you go down that other road, I'm sitting in my bedroom for like months on end, planning and writing and pitching and getting no's. And it was tough, but that gets back to that whole taking these swings. You still got to have things backed up. You got to get your backing from your missus, hope that it helps when she's working, and then measure it all. What's it going to do? And if it comes back to your getting your head right, I think that's super important. If I stayed another year in that game, then who knows what would have happened? Because I would have I might have stayed another year and stayed another 3, and I had to get out there and swing the bat. So there's a real pros and cons. Analyze your money situation, take a swing, and hopefully something works. In my case back then, it didn't work probably financially, but it set me up for other areas probably 5 years later where it financially worked. Like in those 3 years where I wasn't on a morning radio show, I had some of my best Ricky Gervais interviews that I could play on other shows that I was still on. I had the Sandler moment. Not that I wouldn't have got those, but there was still great shit happening. And so I think that gets back to if you stop something, it doesn't mean your core of who you are stops. I think we relate ourselves, our identity is sort of attached a lot to our job and our profession or something that we're a part of, where you don't lose who you are if you step away from that, but you think your identity is so important. So that's like this handbrake on you progressing, so sometimes it's good to throw the cat amongst the pigeons, right? And just see what happens.
No, absolutely. I'm a strong believer in it. Look, if you're not happy in what you do, and historically, this is the longest job I've ever been in for about 12 years now. And I historically, I've done 6-7 years, and then I've started to not enjoy it anymore. So then I've kind of moved, regardless of the financial implications. It was the right time for me to kind of move, So again, hats off for realizing that, perhaps, again, getting out the comfort zone, isn't it? You were not, and there is something to be said about, you spend a lot of time at work. Now, for a lot of people, that might be 8, 9, 10 hours a day. If you don't enjoy that, can become such a chore. And I'm very, very privileged and blessed that the job I have right now, along with doing the hobby of the podcast, I don't have that feeling of like going into work where I hate it. I love my job. I work 2 days, 2 nights, 4 off. It works for me, enables me to do the podcast. Do you know what I mean? So there is that for me is priceless.
Yeah. Yep. No. And look, people that can't leave straight away the job, I always say, why don't you try and turn it into a game? Like break things out, take yourself out of any of these equations and maybe getting smashed by the boss. But I'm a big fan of understanding what the motives are of people. What do they want? Why are they breaking my balls in this situation? Why? Are they having their own issues in their own personal life that they're bringing it into work? Like and then am I the one pissing them off or am I not? What's going on here? How can I change? Can I test today changing a bit of my tact to see if it changes their tact back to me? Flip it into some sort of little game and see if that can help. So they're just tricks that I always sort of employed over the years when you hold, every job, no matter what you do, is still dealing with people, right? As much as we try to not want to have our jobs deal with people, but we've got to deal with people, and every time I'm dealing with someone, I'm constantly assessing feedback, in that situation. So, I think figure out how to one day try it as a game. Try things as a game to see if that can help.
No, absolutely, pal, absolutely. So that leads me on to lastly, what's on the horizon, Brad?
Yeah, horizon. This is good. Well, look, talking with you is quite inspirational. I actually feel like I want to run through a bloody brick wall. You ask good questions and you're firing me bloody up. And so well done on your interview technique and your style.
A massive compliment coming from you, pal. I really do.
You're a chilled guy, and but you ask firm questions, and it's a great mix, and it's going to serve you well in all aspects of this sort of media game. Look, what's next? Look, I still I still want to keep. I love US sports. I've enjoyed that, but I don't want to become a sports guy. You can get pretty branded, pretty good. I still want to be, keep my celebrity chats going and creating laughs. And I haven't done man on the street stuff for many years. And it's funny now, you go on Instagram and YouTube and everyone does man on the street. I was doing man on the street in the middle O's, and there was no one out there. Now you walk around Manhattan and you'll see 10 people interviewing strangers on the street, which is pretty good. But look, I got to wake up every day and keep coming up with new ideas. See if I can pitch shows and keep talking to people and keep going out there. Maybe this is maybe it goes back to, I always 25 years ago, this started with me wanting to be an actor. Maybe I'll wake up one day and go, let's go make a sitcom. But look, mate, I can't give you anything direct. You just make sure the kids get on the bus in the morning, and then I sit at my desk and try to hustle and keep posting on Instagram and post on TikTok. And don't get much traction on TikTok, but most of my interviews are with people over the age of 30, so I guess that's why. But I just keep pushing, and I reckon just keep doing that. But I've got to take a bit of my own, not advice, because I don't want to think I've given advice on this thing, but my own outlook on life and swing the bat more. It's a people business, and as much as I'm so confident, if you can put a celeb or any person in front of me with a microphone, I'll give you 1.5 minutes of gold. I've no worries about doing that. But my big thing is I've got to meet more people. You just get lazy at chatting to people in power, or like in your case, someone that could potentially be a sponsor for your podcast. Like, should you be going out, cold calling or cold emailing 5 different potential sponsors on a Monday morning? Yes, you should. But do you, or do I go out and hit up, an executive at Netflix and say, look, here's my last 5 interviews. Is there, can we chat and see? I also do this sports report to Australia that, over 1 million people watch every week, and people seem to enjoy my take on things. Is there something we can develop together? I'm not doing that as aggressively as I should. So the lesson you can take from my failures on that account is you've got to keep talking to people, and it's and people in power. And I always thought you had to pitch someone and you get a yes or no, and then that's it. And it was always the wrong mentality. I think as long as you're chatting to these people that can open a door for you, and just keep chatting, keep checking in. And I'm saying that out loud to sort of inspire myself to do more of that. So that's where I'm at, mate.
No, look, networking's everything. I do this as well. Like you say, networking, speaking to yourself. You don't know what sort of doors that's going to open.
That's right.
And it's good. Look, you're obviously kind of a very kind of confident person, and you kind of got a proper gift of like talking and coming across really, really well. And that's genuine as well. So, look, you don't need to change anything from my perspective. What you do is like it works and it's brilliant. And look, it's refreshing what you do, and like I said to you, please keep on doing it. And for anyone that's watching this, the audience or the viewers, please go and check out Brad Blanks on some of his material on YouTube, because it is brilliant. But I suspect many of my audience and viewers, they must have been living on the moon if they've not seen some of your clips, because they are pretty viral and out there, aren't they?
Oh, they've gone good. They've gone good. They've gone good lately. It's good to when you start. Something that was on the radio, old school legacy media, and you do something on the radio and it just sort of vanish. And it's been great to put all my old interviews now, just start putting them up. And I've got over 1,000. I've probably got 5,000 interviews, but over 1,000 good ones where there'll be awkward moments, or me screwing up, or the celebrity smashing me, or the celebrity creating their own gold. That I'll be placing, So, I'm excited for creating my own little project, doing that, and it's just sort of hopefully people get a laugh out of it, and see the people I'm talking to in a good light, because that's all I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to have a laugh as well. So I don't know where all this goes, but it's been a hell of a journey. Good, just damn good fun.
No, excellent, pal. Look, like I said, please keep up what you're doing, because I thoroughly enjoy it, and I know there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people out, if not millions of people, that love what you're doing, pal. So
thanks, mate. Awesome.
Keep doing that.
Hey, mate, and well done to you too, and thank you for your service and everything you've done over the years, and what you're now doing is great. And in terms of this podcast, thank you for doing this from a mental health aspect, and shining a light on that, and getting those inspirational stories that I hope will help many, many people. So well done, Chris.
No, thank you for your kind words, pal. I really, really appreciate it. And again, thank you for taking the time to come on. I've really, really enjoyed it. Brad, take care. You have a great day, pal.
Yep. See you, bitchy.